I belabor all this because our last two readings this morning are full of spiritual shock and awe. Okay? It doesn't get any more powerful than these passages. Ephesians talks about our being strengthened in our inner being through the power of the Spirit, that Christ may dwell in our hearts, and that Christ might in us accomplish abundantly more than we can ever ask or imagine. And John gives us not one but two miracles, as if one wasn't enough. Jesus feeding the 5,000 using only 5 loaves and 2 fishes shortly before walking on water. And I believe that very often we read these prayers and stories and think either A, this is all unrealistic nonsense, mythological or metaphorical, as evidenced in the countless sermons to which Episcopalians are subjected year after year about Jesus tearing the loaves and the fishes up into such infinitesimally small pieces that everyone gets a crumb or something. That is not my sermon. But that's one option. Or we think that the miracles actually did happen, somewhat the way that the text describes them, but that they only happened back then. They don't happen now. They lived in an age of miracles, and we quite simply do not, for one reason or another. But I think both options actually miss what's really interesting about the miracles as John remembers them in these lessons, particularly the feeding miracle. So according to John, Jesus takes the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, gives thanks for them, says grace over them, as it were, and distributes them to the crowd. It doesn't say what this looked like or what it appeared Jesus was doing. There's no mention of a magic wand or a poof, bang, kapow, or lightning bolts or anything like that as loaves exploded out of Jesus' ears. There's no such description in the text. There's no comic book story here. It just says Jesus distributed the food. That's it. And when everyone had had as much as they wanted, the disciples gathered up all the leftovers, and the bread scraps filled 12 baskets. That's all it says. It doesn't say what it looked like. What it does say is that it's then and only then, after the bread scraps have filled the baskets, that the people saw the sign that Jesus had done. Did you all catch that? The miracle is over when they realize it was a miracle. The miracle itself, the distribution and the feeding of the people, takes place under their very noses, and they don't see it. Not until it's already done. And that, friends, is very often what the presence of God is like. A miracle in retrospect. And that's why I actually think my parents were right to tell me, you'll just know. It's an odd thing to say. You'll just know. But think about the other times we say it in our day-to-day lives. It's the answer we often give to one another when somebody asks us, how did you know your spouse was the one? And you're like, I just knew. I don't know, I just knew. And for my part anyway, it's not that I just knew I wanted to marry Jewel, because when we met in an orientation at YDS, spiritual lightning bolts came down from the sky, and there were huge neon signs that said, it's her, it's her, it's her. No offense, Jewel, there were no neon signs. Instead, it was the result of the long haul of our nearly 3-year relationship. A life lived together in the presence of one another long enough to realize we were something good together, that we weren't alone when we were apart. See, we say, well, I just knew. Not because there's some magic moment of shock and awe, but precisely because there isn't one. If there was more to say, we would say it. Well, I just knew is what we say when we're trying to describe our knowledge of something so subtle and so simple, it eludes word and thought. Were it more obvious, we would go into more detail. But it isn't. So we don't. And we just say, we just knew. And that's the way life with God is too.